We're good.
Hello, friends and gamers. So we're sitting here now for the third little chat that we're having here between myself and Wintermute. And the subject of today's discussion is in the game Global War 36. If there is a propensity or, if the game is sufficiently balanced that every faction wins roughly equally, with all things else being equal, if you have similar play skills, if the game is sufficiently balanced that it's kind of a coin toss as to who will win, with some, of course, differences, of course. But is there a propensity within the game for one alliance to win, or is it fairly well balanced? And so that's what the discussion topic is today. So I'm going to hand the floor right away to hear Wintermute to say something.
Well, the first thing I want to say is balance in a game with this many variables is super hard.
Yeah.
Super hard.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I've seen people, and I've really stomped down some people who got nasty with the game on like YouTube videos or whatnot, or comment boards about, not play testing and stuff like that. And I'm like, no. Okay, let me give you a real world example here. And I use the game Hearthstone a lot as kind of like an example when I'm talking about this particular topic. Now, if you're not familiar with Hearthstone, it's put out by Blizzard Entertainment, the guys who do World of Warcraft. It's a collectible card game format, but on the computer. But that's the kind of format that they use. So it harkens back to Magic the Gathering, which I played when I was younger. So the designers of that game take a lot of flack for balance whenever a new expansion comes out. Now, here's the thing that you got to remember. Let's say Blizzard is a huge company at this point. Let's say they have 1,000 people alone just working on Hearthstone on every aspect of it. And these 1,000 people each play 1,000 games during the playtesting period of an actual expansion. We're talking just the expansion. So 1,000 times 1,000. Imagine how many games that is. It gets played throughout the excuse me, the development process. And tweaks are made here and there, and feedback comes to the developers. Okay, now the release day comes.
Yeah.
And that 1,000 times 1,000 is nothing compared to the millions of games that are played in the first 24 hours. That's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
They did the best they could, but there are so many worldwide players that the testing pool was not big enough to catch a problem with these couple cards.
Yeah.
They would have eventually come up and that's a problem. But you needed really a good 500,000 games to get there. Well, they didn't have 500,000 games. They only had whatever 100,000 or whatever it is. But as soon as those cards hit the market and people buy that expansion and put it out there, and the real competitive players, the people who literally play this game for a living, the competitive players, the players who always are looking for an edge, will find every little rule thing, every little interaction between the various cards, and exploit it to its fullest to gain that advantage. And they're not even happy with it all. Sometimes they're like, I feel kind of bad doing this. But at the same time, if it's going to win me and I'm playing in a major tournament, I'm going to do that. And that's where people forget is playtesting is only going to catch so much.
That's right. Yep.
In and of itself, not to mention that just the playtesting pool of any game is much smaller than when it hits the mass market. Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
And we'll talk about Global War or Action Allies 1940, where, how long did it take for people to collide of the entire community to kind of realize, oh, there is an advantage for the Axis? It took a long time.
Yeah.
But eventually it was realized.
Yeah.
So
there's like certain strategies kind of came out to the forefront, and if you do this, you'll give you kind of help balance things, or help not balance things, but give you an edge and this kind of stuff, right? Yeah, especially since Global 40 jumps right into the combat with Germans being able to kind of plan things out, this strategy, or this strategy, and they could tip the balance of the scales the other way. Yeah, that's the advantage of 36 is you start a little bit further back, and people can kind of accommodate for whatever strategy.
And again, that just increases the number of variables that you need to take into account.
That's right. Yeah.
And
I would say too, so when I find this game, so people who are designing games, they kind of have a microcosm onto their own. They saw the foundation and they kind of grew up with it. And as it layered up and got more complex, now you introduce the game into the market, and now these people read the rules and they're like, hey, my grasp of English wasn't so good. And so the guy whose grasp of English might not be so good, he explained the rules to everybody else, and they kind of had a misconception of how the rules go or whatever, right? Some people put a different emphasis on different words. Like even in our chats, you call things by a different name, and I'm Canadian, you're an American, and certain things that you say differently, like, it surprises me, right? And so we learn it, and we have a microcosm of a game culture here, and you have one here, and then we start seeing problems. Is like, well, the emphasis we read is different here, and so rules tend to, well, they get on shaky ground once it's released too, and that's when bugs come through. Yeah.
And again, every game, no matter what it is, has this problem. Okay. There are even people who argue the rules of chess.
Yeah,
there are. Okay, there are, because throughout history there have been different variations on how to castle.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, how to how to do certain things, about how this, a restriction on this piece or something like that.
Yeah.
There are that is a real thing.
Yeah.
So taking that into account, I don't want people, we're not beating you. You have to understand that. Don't beat up a game because it hits the market. Now, if it's wildly off base, that's a problem. You know, the Tom Vassals of the world will call the game out, and the game company hopefully listens and moves on.
Yeah.
But you know, at the end of the day, players sometimes get real pissy about it, and I'm like, calm down. Calm down. Right. It could be a problem. Yes. Let's play a few more times. Let's get a few more iterations under our belt. And some games also can, you can, at certain points, you can do whatever you want up here, these couple turns ahead, but the game always ends up here.
Yeah.
And if you don't end up here, the chances of you winning slide dramatically to the point where you start to see the problem. You see there's a potential problem there.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a bottleneck point, or like a funnel point. You can do whatever you want out here so long as you hit this funnel point. And so some games, while they have a lot of variables, sometimes you can look at them and kind of look for that. Okay, but no matter what strategy you use here in this theater or the way you play these cards or the way you move these pieces, when you get to this point in the game, if you're not at this point, you're going to have a problem. If you get to this point or if you get to this place at this point in the game, you're pretty much guaranteed to win. Sure. Well, that's the opposite end. Now you're okay. Now,
and we might see a lot of that in Axis and Allies specifically. Like, I've played a bunch of those games, but I don't know. I could count on the fingers of one hand when I've played to actually the rules conclusion, where the rule says you have to hold X amount of victory cities for Global 40, right? Usually we get to that funnel point where, or whatever you want to call it, is like, at this point you should be here. If you are here, you win the game. If you're not here, you'll lose the game. And kind of that's where it is. Or, you get what I'm trying to say. If the allies aren't at this position at this point in the game, you've basically lost, right? And so you quit.
One thing I want to add to that, and one of the things that's now in chess,
concede defeat. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, my bad.
In chess, you have a binary: you win or you lose.
Yeah.
However, that's how most people will phrase it and put it in their heads: you win or you lose. You win or you lose. However, as a player playing chess, you have the ability to go, okay, did I lose? Those points, those chess piece points actually have a point value.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And a lot of people who don't play chess seriously don't know that.
Yeah. No,
okay, did I lose where I took 20 points of your units or 40 points?
Yeah.
If I start out playing against you and I'm constantly I only take about 10 points worth of units from you every game, but then a couple weeks later I'm up to 20 points, I'm showing improvement. So I'm closing that.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Global War has that same thing in that, we say, who won? Well, these guys won. But I am interested to see, I do usually like to hear people, I want to hear them explain, well, how, by what margin? Was it a close game? Did the Allies win with all 18 points? And then the Axis did the Axis win with all 18 points? And the Allies had 5 and the Russians had 0?
Yeah.
That's a blowout.
Oh, it is.
Or was the margin a lot closer than that?
Yeah.
Did it win by a couple points? Was it a close game? And if you start playing Global War and you are like, well, I'm losing by these huge margins, but then the third, fourth, fifth time you play, you start realizing that you're closing those margins. Well, you're probably doing something right. And that's an indication that you're doing something right. You're closing those margins. You're getting those. Okay, now how do I push myself to where I can have a much better chance of winning from where I'm at now?
Yeah,
and that's a good thing about this game. and about games where it's not a binary yes or no. It's all right, am I doing better than I was before? And that to me is a good aspect of this game that a lot of people miss. They're too focused on did I win or did I lose? It's like, all right, I lost as the Allies again, but this wasn't a blowout.
No, that's right. Yeah.
And that could be a fun game.
It can be a fun game. So 36, I've compared to Axis and Allies Global 40, I don't think I've won, or sorry, I haven't played those games to completion, but Global War 36, we have, because it's like you said, it's 3 different factions, and so you can see the margin of your victory. And in fact, that's one of the things for this tournament that Panzer King hosts in Prince George. That's one thing we wanted to incorporate as well. Is like you can get first, second, or third place, but it also matters the margin between. And so that's why we created these campaign medals to say this is how close that line was. And yeah, we quite enjoy that system as well. But let's get into this more specifically now. I think. In your mind, who do you think has a propensity to win? If the play skill level is roughly equal, who do you think has a propensity to win in Global War 36?
I think the advantage is to the Axis. Now I know, just as a point, you believe it's the common turn.
I think it's common turn, yeah.
And I know there are players out there that say the Allies. So maybe that's an indication that maybe somewhere out there it is.
Yeah.
Now maybe it's also once different groups start exposing themselves to other play styles, they'll come to, and I think that's what happened with Axis and Allies 40 is this play group did X, Y, and Z, this play group did X, Y, A, B, and C. But when they started to come together in the broader scene and compare notes, the other group kind of went, oh, I can do that.
Yeah,
and then that's when things started to kind of homogenize and level out.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
Well, I've got an example of that later, but for me, the Axis have the advantage for a couple reasons. One, they control the pace of the game wholeheartedly.
Yeah, true.
Nothing happens in this game pretty much without them pulling the trigger.
Yeah.
You can play a very passive Germany and let Britain get to its wartime economy and then declare war on you, even though you haven't invaded France yet. But how does that win you the game?
I don't know if it
doesn't.
Would.
And that's fine. There is a historical. There needs to be some realistic historical motivations in a game that's a lot more sandbox than something like Global War or Axis Allies 40 to motivate you to go out there and play the game. Because if you're not going to actually go play the game, why are you playing the game? They control the pace, and they have such an ability to simply pick a target and evaporate that target, and there is zero ability for the Allies to respond, that there's almost no way for them to overcome it.
So you mean ability to target when they launch the war, since they control the pace?
Not just when they launch, but specifically not just when they launch, but how they launch. And not so much. Germany's pretty straightforward in what you want to do and how you want to do it. Japan has a lot more play and a lot more variables. Excuse me. And Italy again is Italy. It is both. It both has a lot of flexibility, but a lot of problems at the same time. Yeah. So they're interesting to play. I'm not saying they're fun to play. They're interesting to play. But like, look at Japan. If Japan just wants to, you can every turn. If India, FEC, and Anzac want to just do nothing but build up their defenses in Calcutta and Sydney, and even through the build-up phase, Japan is just going to walk in and take it when it wants.
Maybe I don't know.
if they, they can just walk in. It's so, because they control the pace of the game, and it's so difficult to anticipate, and they have such big economies and so much firepower to build up the way they want to, and there's very little to counter that. Now there's obviously, I'm playing a lot of debate. There's a lot of wiggle room here.
Sure, yeah.
But in general, my group kept seeing that I want to take India. I just take India. Yeah, right. He's built nothing but defensive units all game, and his flak and fighters and fortresses. But if Japan just wants to take India, they just take India. They just do it.
Hmm.
And there's nothing that India can do to and even then the casualties they take are so minimal that it is not necessarily going to slow down their moment. Maybe one turn. Maybe it slows them down one turn before they can reload and just start scooping up the money islands and start threatening Sydney.
So who do you most often play then?
I usually play I've played the allies more.
Okay.
I've played the common turn least.
Hmm.
But that's Japan. We also saw some issues with Germany and the way that their victory conditions are written. They're too easy to achieve.
Okay. Yeah.
So what we had a player who even he admitted, I wasn't even thinking about this. He goes, I just roll into Russia, take all those border territories.
Yeah.
And then you can only maybe counterattack into one, which he can go in with enough guys to not even worry about that. And then he just spends $30, $40, $50 on fortresses because he has advanced construction, and he just places a fortress all along those territories he just took because they're the victory point territories.
Yeah.
And he goes, okay, well, Russia is down 4 victory points because I have 4 home territories.
Right.
He's not taking any points from me. I have not only am I denying him points, I'm getting victory points for those territories, and then Poland and some of the Balkans and whatnot. And it was and it became this stalemate of I could do nothing as Russia. Well, and now he did break out and he did go into the Caucasus, and there was still nothing. And even he said, he goes, I didn't even have to do it. I go, I know you didn't have to do it, but I couldn't crack you. As soon as Germany invades and they just throw up a wall of fortifications and just go, okay, we win. Yeah, that's a problem we kept seeing. And me and the rest of the guys, we kept doing the math, and it was like, well, there's very little reason for him to go any deeper into Russia.
Well, that's true. Another thought too there is, like you said before, there's all about variables as well too. So it might not be just the Russian aspect of it. Like, Stalin was crying for or hoping for a second front to be opened up. So in that case, maybe that's what it needs to be happen, like a second front opened up so that you can move into those areas. Or what do you think? Like, how did that go in that game?
I'm going to go back to the militia video.
Yeah.
Militia are so cheap for Germany to invest in those coastal territories that we did the math. We kept looking at it, and it's like, how do we fight this?
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah.
I mean, any territory we attack on the Russian front or the British and Americans into France is going to be such a Pyrrhic victory. He can just throw us back without a care. He already has the counterattack forces there. There's very few ways to break a stalemate like that. And it just became well, do we go open a front up in the Scandinavia and Finland and go in? By then the game is over.
Okay, so
that's the problem we kept running into. One last point I want to make is it's too easy for Japan to keep America out of the war for too long into the game. And then you pair that with a couple bad die rolls on America's side. And they literally sit the game out doing nothing but lend-lease. By the time they get in, it's like, not only have they lost out on a ton of economy because Japan played a very conservative game, which I think is the clearly the best way to play. Because the least amount of times you give America to roll those D12s and increase its income that way, then that's more and more time that there's not spending in the game. Those are the reasons why I think once the dust settles, the game favors the Axis. Once people realize that you can play this way, it becomes a problem.
Did you want to address Italy a little bit too?
Italy is an oddball, and it's more difficult to kind of talk about because I've seen games where Italy is right there with Germany. They start the war right away.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes they struggle, sometimes they don't. Their victory conditions, though, are also a little too easy, in my opinion. Now that said, the designers said that they deliberately made them a little bit easier because they're a much weaker nation, and that is fine. The logic there makes perfect sense. I get what they're going for. I still think though that they are still a little bit too easy. That, and I think that's the other problem is in general the Axis can just expand and then stop, and then just fortify, and there's very little the Allies can do to it. And that's I guess that's the best way to sum it up. That's what our group kept seeing, and we're just like, how do we do this? How do we counter this?
Well, yeah. So essentially, your stuff boil it down to they set the pace of the game. They're the aggressors, and they can set when they want to go to war and who they want to hit. And that first kind of hit is where it matters. Like the Japanese have their surprise strikes, so they can do something with that too. And like you said, you can utilize that in Kolkata or Sydney and take out a victory point. And they're also worth an extra victory point for capturing those capitals as well. Not to mention it takes away the treasury in the case of Australia. So they set the pace, and they can choose where to hit, and they can choose where to focus because they got enough resources. Whereas the Allies and the Comintern are just kind of building up to wartime defense at the very least, whereas the Axis they're already at wartime defense. They have sufficient for wartime defense. They have more than sufficient because they have enough resources to go into attack right away. So basically, they already got the force buildup, and they could choose where to go with that. They can choose, the Germans' case, Russia, France, or if they want to go over through the sea, to try to hit England. Japan has that surprise strike. Germany can kind of set where it wants to go, and its victory points are very easy to grasp. Like you said, you can grab Russian territory and build fortifications and kind of hold it out and have fortress Europe in some sense, right? So their victory points are somewhat easier to hold on to. Once you grab a certain amount of territories, you just go into defense mode with militia and fortifications, in essence, is what you're saying. And I agree with that. I agree with that. And then Italy, I think the main thing with Italy, the current meta strategy is not do anything with them. And I think that's fair because they get 3 victory points. If they win the Spanish Civil War and they take out Ethiopia, they already have 3 out of 4 victory points, 4 out of 5 victory points because they hold Rome. That's not bad for not doing anything in the war. And then the last victory point, they just have to have, I think, is more ships or more surface warships or more capital ships in the Mediterranean than their opponents. And that's not that difficult to do either, right? I mean, no, it's not. It's difficult to do, but the Allies have to work for it.
It's not impossible.
Yeah. And the Allies have to work for it to get to that point. And that's 4 victory points that they're guaranteed to hold on to at the end of the game just by doing nothing. So there is their advantage. So I agree with you. The Axis are up there, but I still think the Comintern come out ahead. But we can get into that later on because the weak link in the chain, I think, is Japan amongst the Axis, because Germany, it can go into fortress mode, boom, good and solid. But Japan, all of its victory points are all kind of spread out. Some in the South Pacific, with the Dutch East Indies. You have some with some islands here and there, the Philippines, Hawaii. But America can choose which way to go. And so they have some of that same advantage that you say the Axis have in the idea of where they can selectively target and decisive force on a single point, essentially, to take out victory points. So they are the weak link, as far as I'm concerned, amongst the Axis.
And when I say alpha strike, it doesn't even have to be we're just going to bowl right into Calcutta. Right. You can surround Calcutta, and then the next turn take it out. And there's no way to reinforce it. There's no way to get any.
That's right.
And in most cases, even with the fortifications, that's probably your better way to do it. With or without fortifications, that's probably the better way to do it.
I agree.
But it's going to be such an overwhelming amount of firepower concentrated on a single point. You just break it, and then the way you kind of peel it back, which again, in a broad sense, kind of makes sense. But there's so little that the Allies will ever be able to do to counter it.
That's right. Yeah. Your point about keeping America,
that becomes where we have in our group, we kind of like, what the hell do we do about this?
Yeah. Your point about Japan's ability to keep America out of the war, or Japan and I guess the whole Axis too, for that matter, about keeping America out of the war. I don't know if that's completely valid because America is in the war. Like, there's people that play America and they just save their money, they build up a force and get ready to go. I think that's the wrong way to play them. I think America, the way you play them is you send Lend-Lease to everybody. Fighters for this guy, fighter for that guy, like whatever you need to do, send your money all out into the world, because that money is immediately in the combat. It's not sitting on your carrier decks off the coast of America waiting to go. So I think I think the previous meta used to be, not because people knew this, but just because they didn't understand Lend-Lease very well, was just to wait until it was your turn to play as America. Now, I think the current meta should be, or is going to be, Lend-Lease everything to everybody. Get rid of your income.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I think America does need to Lend-Lease aggressively, super aggressively, because it does help prop up. And I mean, the last game I played as Japan, or the Axis, I was playing as the Allies. Excuse me. The Japanese player was steamrolling China.
Oh yeah.
I mean, he was doing the slow roll, and it was just every turn, whatever he wanted to take, he just took it, and there was nothing I could do about it. And it got to that point where I think he had one turn where he had a real shot at taking out
Yunnan, probably.
Yunnan, yeah. And he played it conservatively, and he didn't take it. I think that's what tipped it. And the only reason I could get away with keeping Yunnan up and running was an infantry from America, or an AA gun from America every turn. And then sometimes I even had the FEC sending up. When I felt I could afford it, because they have their own problems.
Yeah, they do.
That it's like, okay, at least China is not out of the war, because if China ever exits the war, the sigh of relief that Japan gets to get is just like, oh we did it, guys. We made it over the finish line. Man.
Well, all those resources,
who cares? We got this. That's what it feels like. That's what it feels like sometimes, if they manage to take out China.
And all those resources tied up containing China is suddenly like free, and now you can go. Well, now you can chase after Russia. Now you can go after the common, the India and such like that. This opens up the playing field quite a bit for them.
And I know China's counterattack capability isn't that great, but you know what? If you've got if you finally hold out in Hunan with just a couple infantry, and then you build turn after turn, and then you get the Lend-Lease, and you get it up to about 8 or 9 infantry, and then after that you're just doing artillery, Lend-Lease artillery. You save up their money at $2 every turn, then they build their own artillery, and then eventually you got 8 guys and 8 artillery. That is a real threat.
Especially if Japan does not have if Japan doesn't have like lots of factories present on the mainland, well, then it suffers, because everything you take off, they can't replace them as you can. So that you made a good solid case for the Axis, as far as I'm concerned. I think you have me partially convinced. No, I think you've laid out some really fantastic points, and I think all things being equal with skill level, I think I'd almost categorize them into 3 different levels. If you're novice players, certain things will happen with the propensity for certain factions to win. Intermediate, it'll be a little bit different, and then expert as well. Would that change for you? Like, would you say the Axis would be probably in all 3 categories, they would have a propensity to win, or not?
If you're a novice player, then the Axis become really hard to play. Because you need, and again, this was kind of illustrated the last time I played with Tim, the local store owner here, who was very new to this. He played plenty of Action Allies, but he's very new to Global War, and he just made a lot of mistakes. He wasn't aggressive enough. He didn't understand how. Now I tried to, as far as I was concerned, it was a learning game. So I wasn't like trying to hammer him or anything, and I was pointing out, you're going to have to think about this. But like that German double impulse, he completely, and I know I've talked about this in my video, he completely misunderstood how to build for that. And so he went in, and then I kind of walked him through after the attack how the double impulse works, and he goes, "Oh man, I completely screwed up how I built this." Well, I go, okay, so here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna pull off all those units. You're gonna replace them with the units you would have built. Now that you understand how Germany works and blitzing and the double impulse and all that, and you're gonna replace them. You're gonna put those guys on the board. We're gonna do an equal exchange, and then we're gonna just keep playing. And that's an example of where a novice player is going to really struggle with Germany. They're also going to really struggle with maybe with Japan with playing Japan, because logistically Japan is it can be a brain burn for your best players.
I agree.
Keeping all the transports and the amount of guys and bouncing around and making sure that you always have a couple transports back, so you never get a turn where you've got nobody to move because all your transports are empty. man, that can be that logistically, that is really difficult.
Oh, it's hard, yeah, and especially since they have special features too, like surprise strike. Now you get a +1 movement, and there's other stuff too, right? So in novice level or novice level, common turn you'd probably think is the easiest, right, to play for the novice players. Yeah, so they have more likely to win.
And again, also at novice level, I think the German player can make a mistake in going into Russia by just not having enough guys. Because when you look at Russia, Russia actually has quite a lot of units that they start the game with.
They do.
They're just spread out over all of Russia.
And
it's easy to miscalculate thinking, oh, I'll just roll right through those border territories. But as soon as he consolidates a lot of that and then starts really building and then gets his bonus of extra units, cheaper units that first turn, suddenly it's like, oh, I did not bring enough guys. And so that's completely plausible. I can see that happening a lot.
There's also mistakes they can make as well, like forgetting that the Germans have their surprise strike where all the Russian defense is -1, but you could kind of account for that pretty easy. So I would say in a novice game, the common turn have the advantage because the Commonwealth and the Allies are so spread out. Like the Allies, they kind of out of it for a bit, but it's either in a novice level game, it's either the Allies or the common turn. I think it's more likely the common turn because they don't have that sea element to worry about. They just worry about the land, and that's basically it. And that's all they have to worry about. And all their victory points are also nearby. Like 11 territories or up to 11 victory points can be collected from territories with an IPP value. So yeah, that's not very complex. Just here, done. Kind of, you figure that out. On an intermediate level, would you say that the Axis have any propensity to win in that level? Is that when
it becomes a lot more? I think it becomes a lot more balanced.
Balanced in the intermediate.
The Russian player may get a little more hinky. The Russian player can do some attacks prior to the war. They can try to take out some border territories. But I still think that's risky for Russia.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it is.
Because they just don't have a ton of. I mean, they have guys, but how much are they going to lose in going into some of those territories? Now, some are just a cakewalk. Some are just a cakewalk. Some are just But if you get a lucky roll, like going into Karjala up in Finland, there's 4 infantry there. If you hit all 4, suddenly you're like, oh god, that was costly.
That's right.
So it's always a little bit of risk with Russia.
So a bit more balanced in the intermediate, you'd say. I think you're right, because in the intermediate, that's when people experiment a bit more too. If you're at an intermediate level, sometimes people get, let's see what happens if I do this and do that. And so I think it is more balanced, and people have still likely of making mistakes. At the expert level, you would say that's when it shifts over to the Axis, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that their high-end skill level and their abilities and their economies and just the flow of the game favors the Axis.
Okay, well, that's a decent, well-made case, I think, for that. Now, unless you have something to add, I could go into why I think the common turn work well.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so
I'm curious.
Yeah, so I would say when you look at the Allies, let's look at the Allies first of all. The Allies, they're spread out. The Commonwealth by itself is like this long snake going from Australia to India to Africa and then up Gibraltar and to England, right? They got this long thing that they have to protect, and then they got their convoy lines to protect as well. They're busy, they got a lot of stuff, a lot of balls in the air, and they're also the primary target of the Axis when they come in there. So I think the Allies have it tough, straight from novice level to intermediate and expert. The only easy one if the Allies is probably the USA, because the USA's got that massive income that they can play around with, and it's more forgiving when you make mistakes. So the Allies, for me, they're really hard to play. Maybe at the expert level they get a little easier, but faced against expert opponents, well, it's pretty difficult altogether for them. A lot of their objectives are recover stuff that they lost and contain the enemy, contain the fascists and contain the communists. So it's very much, all their victory points are very much luck based, like hoping that they kind of, mutually negate each other, that you could come in there and kind of contain them. The Allies have this problem too, where say you built your build perfectly and the Axis took out France. So you didn't build it perfectly, but the Axis took out France. And now as Britain, you're ready to pounce on them and grab hold of France. Now, I've come across this problem in this last game I played, an Operation Winter Sauce. You're ready to go. You have the resources to land troops there, but you actually don't want to. Because what happens if you take out France? Well, then the Germans keep chasing after you and they kick you off. And then you make another landing and then they kick you off. They're never going to engage the communists. And so the communists will likely win in that case, right? So the Allies actually have to hold back. They have to wait. They have to wait their turn. They have to wait till kind of like the late game. And so then the Axis engage the Communists, and then that second front is opened up, and then the Allies can come swooping in, open up that second front with D-Day, and hopefully take out France and kind of recover a lot of that territory, hoping that the Axis and the Comintern negate each other, or the Germans and the Comintern negate each other. That's the hope, but it's not always the case, right? They play differently. It's not always the case. And I think Panzer King played an excellent game because, like you pointed out, the Axis Germans, all their victory point objectives are on the. I know he didn't win that game, but they're right on the edge of the map, right? They're right on within the first few territories of Russian territory. You only need 2 turns at best to grab those territories and get your victory points and win the game effectively. You need 2 Soviet victory cities and then a lot of the coastal areas, southern Ukraine, Western Ukraine, and Belarus. So that's pretty easy for them. So he played an excellent game in that one. Okay, so that's why allies are hard. You might have the resources, but you don't want to use those resources because it's only going to allow the communists to win. You have to allow the Axis enough leash to grab hold of the communists and negate them to some extent. So they're a hard one to play. Now, I've covered them extensively, and I think you've done an excellent job talking about the Axis on what to do. And I've talked a little bit in regards to Panzer King, how to play them as well. But I think the Comintern are still easy because if you're setting the pace of the game as the Axis, then you do have an advantage, but the communists, they are last place. So they can kind of, not last place, but they're acting almost last. So they can see what everybody else is doing and react to that. They see, okay, Germany is building up a lot of resources on its coastal areas, so I can put a little bit more effort here. They also got the early portion of the game when they could take out all those neutral nations as well. So they got freedom at the start of the game to play around and take some victory points. They could take out Mongolia, which, we admit both of us is a little bit silly. And then Finland, they could take for another 3 victory points. They've already, between Mongolia and Finland, they have 5 victory points. That's not bad at all. Not bad whatsoever. 5 out of 11 victory points. That's pretty big, right? The Spanish Civil War is an issue and they don't have lots of resources, but if you devote your entire income to the Spanish Civil War and then devote what you have residually left in Russia, not your income, but your units, to take out some of these neutrals like Mongolia, you're actually not doing that bad for victory points. You have this leg up on everybody else. And so at the same token, if the Axis wait for you to do stuff, hold on, let's switch that point around. You said that the Axis have this advantage too, where when they attack, they just attack, grab territory, build fortifications. The Russians can also build fortifications in those areas as well. And so you have that same point that applies to the Axis can apply to the Russians as well. All you need to do is hold on to one of those 3 territories that the Axis want, and that negates their victory point. You need to just build fortifications. Go on.
I do want to make one point. That's assuming that the German player is going to wait.
Right.
Because the Russians, even if you build, actually, I think that's generally speaking, the cities may be the exception, but if you build fortifications all along the border, or even one border, well, it wouldn't matter one border, but along the border, I think that's a bad investment of money.
Yeah, well,
the way that the now it may be just right in certain circumstances. Yeah. And again, you've always got to look at the play state, and maybe he attacks here but doesn't attack here, and that creates this perfect spot. Oh, hey, fortification right there is really going to make him pay for that. Yeah,
I agree with you for sure. Yeah, absolutely. You have a great point. It's a late game thing and it's probably not applicable in this, right? But if it does happen that mid game you manage to push them off, say if they devoted too much resources on the defense of France, you could theoretically kind of do this. So I think the communists also have lend-lease that they can get from America. You could strike deals and all this other kind of stuff. So if you do badly, America's going to help you out, kind of balance you out a little bit. And you could also devote some of those resources to, hey, I need a stronger defense in Japan, or against the Japanese there, and shift some of your resources there so America would send you more. You could kind of manipulate them in that sense where, no, I really need a strong defense against the Japanese. And so that's why you need to send me a little bit more resources. So you got an ally. You're playing the communists all by themselves. They're essentially landlocked. And so you don't have any ally messing it up for you. You don't have any partner messing it up for you. No offense to the partners that work alongside, but in the case of Germany, you could have Japan that completely screws up the game. Germany could be doing fantastically well. Japan makes a mistake, they lose the game, and the Axis come in second or third place. The communists, they're just doing their own thing, and so they have nobody else to mess it up for them. It's all on them. And since all their victory points are like right there adjacent to them, it's not too difficult for them to succeed in the game, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and all that makes sense. I'm going to shamelessly promote another video I did where I talk about the Mongolia issue, Mongolia Part 2.
Yeah.
Where I historically and game mechanically, I think it's not a good way to handle Mongolia the way it currently is. So I propose a kind of house rule. But yeah, I mean yeah. So let's say Mongolia is 2 free points. Karjala is another free point. Now, assuming that you're able to hold it.
Well, I wouldn't sign the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Why would you, right? Like, you grab 3 territories there, you get 3 victory points instead of just 2, and I don't have to worry about the Axis backstabbing.
That's actually maybe, I mean, and maybe that, I think that deserves, the whole Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact deserves its own video.
Yeah. It does, yeah.
To start with. So I won't go into that very often,
right,
or very, very deep. But yeah, and then Russia could also, in theory, later in the game, if they're doing well and Germany isn't really coming at them, or their offensive is faltered,
yeah,
they can start diverting forces down to the Middle East.
Yeah, that's right.
And they can start taking out the assuming that there are still neutrals down there. And then they can start even, maybe if, depending, because I know sometimes Italy likes to come over and immediately take Transjordan, get Iraq. Well, so maybe you're just opening the door for Russia to come down.
That's right. Exactly.
Like, hey, okay, great. I can put a bunch of cavalry there with a couple aircraft to support it, because I'm okay up here, and just start rolling into the Middle East. And it's like, oh God, that's rough. So yeah, no, I
like when you think
and
about,
I'll say this, I probably don't have enough experience with Russia.
Right. Oh yeah. Okay.
But all your points are valid.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking too, like the whole thing of power projection, right? So if you have a transport for the Germans, that German transport can threaten a lot of territory, some English, whatever. A transport for the Allies does the same thing, but it doesn't, you can't really power project into Russia that much. A little bit, but not that much, right? Like there's less, you don't need to spread a defensive force as much. And you got a lot of strategic depth as well. You got a lot of squish, right? So you can actually, I think it's very viable that you can recover from your mistakes quite easily. You have this, you have this discount of troops. If you save up a bit of money, you get a discount on troops on the first turn you're at war. If you go to, you might even jump the gun and declare war on the Axis before they declare on you and get rid of their bonus there as well. There's a whole host of different things that really they can do that really benefit them. Yeah. So going back to what we were saying about different experience levels, if you tier it into 3, like you said on the novice level, so the Comintern have this likelihood of winning, right? And I would agree on that one. And the intermediate level, I think they're still pretty easy to play. And yes, they can make mistakes, but at the end of the day, you still don't have a navy to worry about. And it's just, you got all that squish, you got the discount of troops. At the intermediate level, I still think they have this advantage. And they have, 18 points that's all on their head to resolve. Whereas the Axis they have what, 5 or 6 for Germany, another 3 or 4 or 5 for Italy, right? You get what I'm saying there. And so if you say that one's balanced, I still think it's in favor of the Comintern. And at the expert level is kind of where we would disagree, I guess. For me, I think the Comintern are more likely to win.
Well, the Comintern Russia has 15, and the CCP, I believe, has 3.
Russia has 15 victory points?
Yeah, because the Comintern collectively, right, yeah. So now the CCP is its own kind of animal and problems. Because I've had Japan, like I said, the last game I played, Japan was doing the slow roll, and even though I had a ton of KMT units in with the CCP, they still steamrolled that, and I'm like, okay, well, CCP's done. They're not really coming back this game, so be it.
That's right. Yeah.
So there is a way for. So one thing I would say is look at Russia, where the 15 points you're talking about are probably a lot easier, but those 3 points are a lot more up in the air and a lot more iffy.
They are, yeah.
As in terms of whether you can achieve their goal, which I have played games where I've achieved that goal. I had a runaway game with the CCP. That was fun. But I've had other games where they just get stomped.
Yeah, yeah,
And not even by the KMT early on, where a couple lucky rolls. No, Japan just comes in and just stomps everybody.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, the one for the CCP too, though, is expel foreign influence. Like if the KMT are doing good, then the CCP are doing good as well, right? Even if you've
it's kind of China's a really interesting setup in this game.
Oh, sorry, I may have misspoke there because Hong Kong might be included as part of continental China, so that could be that could be.
I would have to double check. I remember looking at it a couple of weeks ago, but I'd have to double check. But yeah, I know what you're saying. So what I am curious though is is there anybody out there that thinks the Axis or the Allies, excuse me, are the easiest ones to play, that are just going to win more often than the other guys? In some ways, I think I still think the Axis are harder to play, but in their mechanisms, but in some of the decisions that have to be made and the hard decisions that have to be made, I think the Allies, particularly the British, are really hard. And I will say this: the British is the most interesting nation to play.
Yeah,
for that reason.
So
yeah, but I am curious. I would like feedback from players who maybe there are some out there that think that the Allies have all the advantages that in ways maybe we're not seeing, in ways that maybe we're just like, really? How did that work out?
Yeah, the Allies too are tricky because it's like they look like they're doing so badly, and then the Americans step in and it changes the table quite a bit too, right?
I am a firm believer now of the lend-lease to everybody that can take it, even if it's just a couple bucks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
give them something. I lend lease to Free France.
Oh yeah.
Why? Because it helps fortify North Africa most of the time. I mean, or even Southeast Asia. Just something. Right. Just get those units over there to fight.
Yeah,
it's not worth it to hold them back, and I really do believe that.
For me, I was lend-leasing them a fighter each turn because at the very least you're going to use them as a defensive unit. The Commonwealth capture territory and the Free French land aircraft in there to help defend it. It's a symbiotic relationship that worked out quite well.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. Anyways, so that's my thinking on the matter. Now, I agree with you that the Axis do have some pretty nice advantages too, but I think they're out. Well, all things being equal, I think still the Comintern are ahead. And it would be interesting to see what other people's opinions are in regards to allies. If they, where do they stack them as well? Maybe they think that the Axis are difficult and the allies are in the middle and the Comintern are on top or whatever. Like, I'm curious to see what people have to say. In that regards. Yeah.
So I think I made all my points.
Yeah, I did too. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with where we ended this. I think too. So I think victory points need to be restructured, and I've read some interesting things that show that they will be in future games, perhaps, or I've read some interesting suggestions, I should rather say, about things that people would suggest, and some potential different things that could be changed up. And so, for instance, I think the Commonwealth, their whole thing, or the Allies, their whole thing is hold on to what they started the game with. And I don't like that system very much. It's not really engaging too much, right? I know it's based on history, so that's kind of what you have to do, but it's not ideal.
And I know one person suggested giving that the Allies don't have victory points. The Allies don't need them. They're already where they want to be at the start of the war, more or less. They're not the aggressor, so it's the Axis that should be keeping track of victory points. And once they pass a certain threshold, they win the game, or whatever, however you want to say it, okay, we've broken the threshold. If we can stay over this threshold for a turn or two more, we win the game. Now that the Allies can see, they're at that threshold, we got to do something, guys, to push them back, where they're going to be able to declare victory. There's that. There are, for the most part, the victory conditions as they're written, I think are fine. I do take issue with some of the German ones. I think that they're ahistorical and too easy to achieve. And Italy kind of gets wrapped up into that too, a little bit as well. I think some of the Italian ones are ahistorical and too easy to achieve.
I think the Italian ones, the fact that they can stay out of the war and bring all their income into it, I think, they could theoretically get 3 or 4 victory points if you include Rome as an objective city. They could lend lease all their income to somebody else. And now I think they could lend lease all their income. So you have 4 victory points for doing nothing and at no risk, and also keeping a significant portion of the Commonwealth fleet in check and protecting the soft underbelly of Europe, for that matter.
Yeah, the other one I don't like is I don't like that Italy and Germany both get a victory point for Spain.
Yeah,
That cannot be touched. Once
yeah,
they get it, they get it.
yeah.
And then that's it. It can never go away. Even if Spain is conquered,
That's true.
completely 100% conquered by another nation,
That's true.
be it legitimately because they joined the Axis and they were a valuable target, or whether they just said, you know what, screw it, we're going to declare war on a neutral and suffer the consequences. But if Spain is not fascist at the end of the game, they should not get that victory point.
I agree. Yeah.
You know, and if they won and then Spain goes fascist and then somebody attacks, but then it's still neutral, but then somebody attacks Spain and it allies, but Germany can't liberate Spain or the Axis can't liberate Spain, they shouldn't get the victory point for that. And that's and I don't like that one is safe. Once they get it, they get it, and it's it. That's it. They don't got to worry about anything else as far as Spain goes.
Yeah. No, I agree with that one.
That's the one that I think really needs to change. And like I said, there are a couple others that I think are ahistorical and or too easy to get.
Well, I agree with that one. Yeah. I think Italy is a big one, and I feel France needs some fixing too. But whatever, right? You know, those aren't too big of a deal. At the end of the day,
it's just France.
Yeah, it's just France, right? Who cares? No, but overall, I'm pretty happy with the system as it is. You know, I could play with it for sure. The mechanic, though, of if you lose part of your home territory and lose a victory point, I'm not crazy about that, just because it penalizes territories that are more easy to get, and like Russia is a big one, and you know, that's why I'm not crazy about it.
Yeah, I think that one is arguable as to whether the game would whether it would kind of, if that were to taken out or modified in some way, whether that would be an improvement or whether
that's the thing. Yeah. Like in my opinion, I think it might take away from the game, but I understand why they incorporated it. It makes sense, and I'm actually willing to be convinced otherwise, right? You know, I'm not standing firm on this one. I just, you know, like nobody's going to take away a Japanese territory, really, like for the most part. Yeah.
Right. And I personally don't care for it. And and you basically said why I don't care for it already. It's too easy for certain nations to lose home country just at the drop of a hat, you know.
Right. Yeah.
We got 1 or 2 turns left. All right, Japan goes into the back end of Russia. What can Russia do?
Throw the kitchen sink into it, and grab that.
Yeah, I mean, just think of all those coastal territories or border territories. I just take 5 territories on a whim, real quick. Yeah, Russia may be able to mount a proper defense and take them back, but we're right at the end of the game. I go in, I just take a bunch of victory points from Russia, and what are they going to do?
Yeah,
that's just it. So I think that this one penalizes Russia too much. I get the logic behind it, and like you, I can be convinced that maybe there's an important way to do it, or maybe it needs to be rethought how it's worded. But I'm not a huge fan of it either.
A quick thing is it has to be worth the IPP, so that changes things a little bit, right?
Okay. So yeah, they still have like 9 IPP out there.
On the east side, I think they have only 1 near the coast, and then on the west they have Archangel and Karelia and this other few.
Yeah, when I'm talking about over on Japan's side of the board,
right?
Like collectively in that area, they have about 9.
Okay, inland a little bit, inland
maybe about 5, 6, 7 territories that are on the border. You know, they can land troops and then kind of start blitzing in and dropping airborne. I think where I think it's and again, that's just one of those things that the Russian player needs to consider, and that's fair.
True. That's true.
You just can't strip it bare and send it over here like they did historically.
Maybe
but on the other hand, if it's such a, they're so vulnerable to that that it becomes, maybe they shouldn't really be. Maybe it unfairly penalizes Russia. And again, I'm not convinced. I haven't. It's a hard one to analyze, so I can be convinced either way.
So for me, I only discovered this last two games ago, and so that took me by surprise. I didn't realize this was part of the rule book, right? So that surprised me. So maybe that's why I'm still getting used to it. And now that's been incorporated into my head about how that works, and I'm more aware of it. And so as Russia or whoever else, I'll be more aware of protecting these territories too, and not stripping it bare, because it's going to impact things later on. Yeah. So yeah. Excellent. So I think if you're happy with how we're ending it, is it a good place to end, do you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm good.
next week, the video is going to be on my channel, and we're going to talk about the top 3 expansions or top few expansions that we want to take a look at, our best expansions that we like that HPG produces. You'll share some of your thoughts, and I'll share some of mine on which expansions we quite like and the reasons why we like them. And so that will be on my channel next week sometime.
Yep, cool. I'm good with that. And everybody have a good day. Wintermute signing off.
Cheers all.